I forgot.
Okay, I'll just share my screen as well.
Okay.
And then we can, are you seeing the VS Code?
Yep.
Over Zoom? Okay. Yeah, and then we can figure out live share later.
Okay.
What's cool about live share though, like Cecilia or Anne, you can maybe just try typing something.
I signed on as a read only, so I can't, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so like that's what's cool is you don't have to deal with Zoom's like computer controlling or whatever. Okay, so yeah, a higher order function is a function, in this case, the whatever function, that takes another function as a parameter, usually does a bunch of stuff and then calls that function. Let's see this in practice with array methods. So the idea of an array method, and actually let me leave this here. And actually, this is, I think, a good next step. Okay, when I run this code, what's going to happen?
Is it gonna console log I'm a callback function?
That's part of it.
Right. After it console logs, I'm a higher order function.
Okay, why is it going to be I'm a higher order function first and then I'm a callback function? So we can see that that is what happens.
Because you have the block called on line 9.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, sorry, because, yeah. And then because it reads from top to bottom. So it's going to go through the whatever, console log I'm a higher order function, and then it's going to call the blah function.
Yeah, yep, exactly. So the first thing that happens, this whole like line 6 to line 10 is the definition of a function. And so it's kind of like the time for the computer to read this into memory, but not really do anything yet. But then on line 12, I say, you know that whatever function you just learned about, now I want you to call it. Because it is going top down. And so it says, okay, I've just learned about the whatever function. I am going to execute the code of the whatever function. And so it looks at what it remembers about the whatever function, and it says, the first thing I need to do is console log I'm a higher order function. The next thing I need to do is call the parameter, which was a function that was passed to me, or to the whatever function. And so it then executes this function that gets passed in as a parameter, which is this whole thing right there. And the body of that function does a console log for I'm a callback function. So that's kind of the order of operations, the way the computer thinks through it. We will leave that there. Okay, so array methods. You guys have started learning let and const? Or are you using var mostly? Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, I don't use var at all.
Okay. Okay. So let's say we have an array of strings. And in this case, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strings. And our task is to get all of the strings that are fewer than 4 characters, or let's say fewer than 5 characters. The kind of the rote way, the way that you usually first learn when you're programming is to use what tool?
For loop.
A for loop, yeah. When you have an array and you need to either check, or basically you need to look at every item in that array, instead of saying, okay, well, if, this is not correct, names, if names at 0 dot length is less than 5, then, push to a new array or console log or something, whatever. And then if names at 1 dot length, like this is obviously not going to be feasible, right? Because if this array grew to 100,000 items, there's no way I'm going to program that. So that's where for loops come in. And the way that you first really learn is to say, this is called a C style for loop because this is how the C language does them. I is less than names dot length, I plus plus. This kind of for loop is, this kind of programming is very what's called imperative, which means that you have to like fine tune and control every tiny little aspect of the code. Here you're saying, I'm going to start a random variable called I at 0. And I'm starting it at 0 because that's the index number of the first item in the array. We're going to continue looping as long as I, this variable I just created, is still less than the length of the names array, which is 5, because there's 5 items in there. And at the end of each iteration of the for loop, I want to increment I by 1. You can see that it's really, yeah, it's really imperative. Like I'm commanding the computer every single step of the way. Well, certain things are so common, like needing to pull only the items from an array that match a condition. In our case, names that are strings in the array that are fewer than 5 characters. Or if this were more complex, all the objects in an array that have some property marked as true, for example. Maybe we'll do that one next. Those kinds of things are so common that the creators of JavaScript decided, let's just make a method that's built into every array that gets created that can do this sort of thing for the person, for the programmer. And so that's where array methods help us. So array methods help us do common tasks with arrays. Before I move on, do you guys have any questions at all? Is this making sense? Like why array methods exist? Okay. So what are some array methods that you have learned about?
Well, one that I use all the time is map.
Map. Okay, that's a good one. What are some other ones?
Filter.
Filter.
Reduce.
Reduce.
For each. Sort.
Okay. Awesome. There's others too, like find
Yep.
index, sum, every. Yeah, that's pretty good assortment. I don't find myself, the ones that I would say probably 95% of the time, and this is specific to me, so we'll say for Bob, are filter and map. I'd say probably 95% of the array methods that I end up writing are filter and map. I did just like write some code that used find. I don't like the for each method myself. I almost find no reason to use that. Usually if I do need to just loop over an array and do something based on every item, I usually end up just writing an array or a for loop, but I don't know, that's probably just me. So let's focus our efforts in the beginning on filter and map. So up here, well, let's start with filter. When do I want to use filter?
Are you asking?
Yeah. Like what's the purpose of filter?
Filter isn't that the one where whenever you use filter, you're basically trying to create a new array of something taken from the older array? Or maybe it actually doesn't. I don't know that one creates a new array. I think it just modifies, shoot, I don't remember, but I do know that it takes stuff out of an array, right?
It does, yeah, but it does create a new array.
Okay.
So that's
of just the removed ones that you wanted.
That's right. Yep. And that's called a pure function. What it means, or what a pure function means, is that it doesn't alter the original array. It leaves the original array intact, and then just produces a new array that is filtered down the way that you specify. And so when do I want to use a filter? Whenever I only want some of the items from an original array. It's a little bit trivial to use this names array, but we're going to do it just for understanding the syntax. And then maybe we can come up with a better example that's a little more true to real life. Because there's not too many like instances when you're programming, like building a website, where it's like, I only want to display short names. You know, it's not super useful. But it'll get us the syntax. So with filter, like I said, the filter array method, well, let me ask this. Why is it called an array method? Why isn't it called like a filter function? A filter array function.
You can only use it on arrays, maybe?
Yeah. And well, what's the difference between a method and a function? Like strictly speaking.
A method is part of an object.
Yes. Yeah.
And
so
the array object is actually an object in JavaScript that has all these cool things in there to help you.
Yeah. So although arrays are obviously arrays in JavaScript, under the hood, JavaScript treats them like objects. And actually, the truth is almost everything in JavaScript is actually an object. So that might become apparent when you have something like const, whatever, is equal to the string, blah, blah, blah. And I can console log whatever dot length. So this dot and the property length are kind of a dead giveaway that although whatever is set to a string, under the hood, JavaScript treats it like an object because that's how we access properties of objects, right? Strings also have like two lowercase. So what would you call this to lowercase? Like what kind of thing is this in JavaScript?
A method?
It's a method, yeah. Strings, because under the hood, they are also objects, they can have methods. And essentially every single string that's ever created in JavaScript is given the method dot to lowercase or to lowercase method. Well, the same thing is true of arrays. And one of those built-in methods for arrays, I'm going to use my names array up here, is filter.
I'm afraid I have to go get my stand up now. So
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Sorry.
Thanks for joining. So filter, well, let's look at this one. String dot to lowercase. What does that take as a parameter, if anything?
Is it the string, the blah, blah, blah?
So
Or,
the
like,
string
whatever.
is the whatever part, but it's kind of a trick question. Sorry, it's lame. It doesn't take anything as a parameter, although there may be, sometimes there's like optional parameters. I don't know for sure if it's a lowercase takes one. But if I want to lowercase a string, let me, it's kind of silly because it's already lowercase, or let's just do to uppercase is another one. So if I console log this, it takes a string, it capitalizes every letter, and that's what gets console logged, right? That's what gets returned. As a side note, does to uppercase, does it modify the original string, or does it just return a new string? So in this case, if I call to uppercase and then I console log the original whatever, has that whatever string been permanently modified, or is it the lowercase version still?
I don't know. I'm going to go with it does not modify. That's the wrong one. I know it.
Right.
I said it.
Nope.
Oh, yay! Wow.
Right.
Sorry for being so excited. Usually my first instinct's always wrong.
So strings are called, are something that's called immutable, which means that they're unchangeable. You cannot change a string. Just like I could console log whatever at the index of 1, or let's say 0, you can actually index into strings the same way you index into arrays. So this gives me the first character B, but it's impossible for me to say whatever at the index of 0 equals a C. Okay, it's not going to change it no matter how much I want it to. Console log whatever. Okay, so it didn't change the original item because strings are immutable. So I'm not sure how we got down that rabbit hole, but let's get back to filter. So to uppercase takes no parameters. All it does is take the original string, uppercase it, and then return that value. And so if I just run this, the computer's going to say like, well, that was a waste of an operation because I'm not saving that value as a variable or anything. So filter, just like we talked about before, and similar to uppercase, dot filter returns a new array. It does not modify the original names array. And so what do I need to do if I'm going to call names.filter? What do I need to do in order for that to be useful to me? I think you're muted.
Save it as a variable?
Yeah, need to make sure I save it as a variable. So let's call it filtered names. You can call it whatever you want, but let's call it filtered names. So when the creators of JavaScript, oh, I thought I had a pro membership, shoot. I might have to like spin up a new call.
That's fine.
Or upgrade my account while we're talking. So the creators of JavaScript They said, yes, I want to build an easier way to filter items from an array because that's such a common task. But there's no way to know what kind of filtering rules the programmer is going to need. Like they're not going to create a filter out strings shorter than 5 characters, right? And like there's no way they could anticipate every possible filtering logic that you might want to use. And so that's where a callback function, or let's just call it callback, becomes useful. Because essentially what it does is it says, you, the programmer, you need to pass a function to the filter parameter, or sorry, the filter method. And that function needs to return true or false. And then what we are going to do is we're going to, under the hood, loop over every item in the array. And we're going to call this function. And if your function returns true, we are going to include that item in the new array. And if your function returns false, we are not going to include that item in the array. So it's important for this callback function. I'm gonna write it in line here. It's also fine to put it somewhere else. But inside of this function, it's important that I look at each and every item in the array. And so this function is going to receive as a parameter the item that the filter function is currently looking at. This is probably the most complicated part to understand about the filter method and higher order functions in general. So if that doesn't make sense right away, that's totally okay. Essentially the way that I like to think of it is it's like they are asking the developer to give them a tool, and they're going to use that tool on every single item in the array. So this function, I'm going to open this up onto its own line. This function is going to take an item. Again, it's going to represent each one of these items in the array. And I need to return true if I want to include that item, or false if I do not want to include that item. So what's going to happen if I just say return true? And then let's console log filtered
Won't you
names.
just get all the names?
Yeah, tell me why.
Well, because Joe is Joe and Jan's Jan. They're all true. They're all there. You're just going over them right now. You're just going through each item and asking if it's fair. I'm sorry.
No, you're very close. That's the idea, is I'm supposed to use this function to loop over this array, look at the item, and then determine based on whatever logic makes the most sense for my needs, whether or not I should include that item. And I should include that item, or the way that I include that item is by returning true, or the way that I uninclude, what's the word? The way I do not include that item is by returning false. So in this case, like, yes, I'm taking item as a parameter, but the body of my function doesn't even look at item. It's like, I don't care what the item is. I just want this. I want every single item to like pass this filter, pass this test. This is kind of a useless filter method, right? Because it's just including everything. So if I were to write some logic, looking at the item, remember, I want to have filtered names only include names that are shorter than 5 characters long. So it should be Joe, Jan, and Bob.
I'm trying to be patient, but I had an idea.
I have a question.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Let me go ahead first, or Emily go ahead first?
Cecilia, go ahead.
Cecilia.
Okay. So I don't think I quite understand why we're saving it into a variable. Why can't we just say names.filter?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. just like how, well, the reason they made it so that that you had to save it in a variable is so that you don't mess up your original array. They didn't want the filter method to quote unquote destroy the original data, because oftentimes you want to get some of the items from the array, but you don't want to mangle the array. You want to like leave it intact for other uses. They could have chosen to make filter just destroy the original array. Can you think of any array methods offhand that actually do like modify the original array in place?
Like
Yeah.
pop.
Yeah, pop, push, shift, unshift, splice, all of those actually like mangle the original array. For whatever reason, and they decided that they didn't want filter to do that. They wanted to make sure that it left the original one intact. So instead of altering names, it returns the new array that you're going to use. Okay, so Emily, did you have an idea of what our logic should look
I'm
like?
so glad she asked that. I feel like that's a great question. And then it's cool too, because it comes with like the little array. Like you never have to like push it into anything, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Cool.
it just gives you the new array when it's all done. There's no like array.push. If you were doing this manually,
Yeah.
you'd have you'd first have your filtered names, which would be an empty array. Let's not make a name conflict here. Oh wow, I don't know how I did that. Filtered, oh, that's what I did. Filtered names too. So if you're doing this imperatively with a regular for loop, you have to say, here's an empty array for let I equals 0, I is less than names.length, I plus plus, if names at I dot length is less than 5, then filtered names 2 dot push dot push names at I, right? This would be the logic for essentially doing the filter that we're trying to do imperatively, but it's like, yeah, you create a new one and then you modify that as you're going through your for loop. With this, however, what will our logic look like?
Would you do something like if item dot length is less than or equal to 5?
Yeah, less than 5 or less than or equal to 4 in our case.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Sorry, I
so
forgot.
if that's the case,
return item.
So remember, what is it that our
Return
callback
name
function needs to return?
Return the new array, the filtered name.
Oh, yes.
Well, that's what dot filter is going to return. So once it's done looping over my names array, it's going to have a completed filtered names array. Yeah, so Alex got it. The filter method, or rather the callback function here, needs to either return true or false. That's just like something you have to memorize because it's how they created the filter function. If you like look up the documentation, it'll say your callback function should either return true or it should return false. So if we return true from our callback function, it means that we will include this particular item in the array. Okay, we're recording again. So I think that, like I mentioned earlier, the most difficult thing to remember is that this callback function is going to get called many times. it's not just going to get called once, but it's going to get called for every item in the array. Let me bring this down so you can actually see this. Are you, Cecilia, at least are you still connected to live share? That didn't disconnect, right?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay. And Emily, you can see my screen. Okay. Yeah, so this callback function is going to get called once for every item in the array. So it's going to call it for the string Joe, and then the string Jan, and then the string Bob, and so forth. Each time through, this callback, this parameter item is representing the item that it's currently looking at as it's looping over this array and calling this function over and over and over. So we can think of this item as each one of the items at any given time. The very first time through, item is which one?
Joe.
Joe. Then it's going to finish the code of this callback function, which should either return true or false, and determine if that item that it's currently looking at should get included in this filtered names array. And it's going to move on to the next one. The second time it's going to be Jan. So then item is Jan. It's going to check the string Jan.length. And if it passes this if statement, it says return true, which means move it into the new array. Same for Bob. Then it gets to Becky, and it says item is the string Becky if the string Becky.length is less than 5. Now, is that a true statement or a false statement? What was that?
Oh.
False. Yeah, it's no longer true because it is 5, and 5 is not less than 5. So it's going to skip all the code inside of this if block entirely and won't really know what to do at that point. Now we either need to return true or what? Yeah, we either return true or false from our filter callback function.
Do you always have to return the false part?
We're going to see a way to simplify this in just a minute. But actually, you know what? Let's take a look and see, because I'm actually not 100% sure.
Yeah,
looks like you may not need to explicitly return false. It seems like you may. Well, let me ask this: what is going to get returned from this function when it does Becky? What happens if you call a function that does not return anything?
Yeah, it would be null.
It's close. It's undefined. And so it looks like under the hood, the code for the dot filter method, when it gets an undefined, it just says don't include this item in the array because it successfully filtered out Becky and super long name here. That being said, I think it's probably a better idea to explicitly return false. But we're gonna see a way to simplify this. Are there any questions so far on this? This is probably one of those things that's like, well, that makes sense now, but then when I try to use it, it's, I'm going to be confused. And it's because truly it just takes lots of practice. And it probably feels a little like, I don't know, deep, like Inception, where there's a function inside of a function which has a parameter. It's like a parameter inside of a parameter inside of a function. But it, like, the more you do it, the more it will just like totally make sense. Like, I would much rather use a filter method now that I'm comfortable with them than doing a regular for loop. And we'll see why too in terms of simplicity of code in just a second. Yeah, but are there any other questions that have kind of come up or anything that you still find confusing?
I'm I'm wondering, could you also, I mean, like, could you get away with like a for each or a reduce or any of those other ones for this kind of a question?
For specifically removing the long string, or like creating a new array with with the short strings only,
Mm-hmm.
you probably could. Reduce is an interesting one because it gives you even more flexibility than some of the other ones.
Yeah, like I'm
So
just learning about that this morning, so that's why I was curious if.
yeah, technically what you could probably do is reduce the names array into another array. I can't think of why you would want to do that instead of use a
Sure.
filter, but it should be possible, because reduce just, it looks at every item and then you can tell it whether or not to include it in the resulting array. But yeah, that's specifically what filter is for.
Mm-hmm.
So let's simplify this. Anytime you see if some condition, return true, else return false, you can simplify that by just saying return the condition. Okay, because if you think of it this way, this needs to evaluate to true in order for this code to run and return true, and it needs to evaluate to false in order for this code to run and return false. So what you can do is tell the computer, just return whatever this, like whatever Boolean this results in. This is either going to be true or false, and that's what I want to come out of my function.
You can slim it down even more too, right?
You can slim it down even more if you use an arrow function. So when you use an arrow function, you can get rid of the function keyword, and you have an arrow. So it's a little simpler. But then arrow functions, and this is an off-topic thing, so if this like doesn't make sense, then just don't worry about it. But arrow functions also have something called an implicit return, where if the code is on the same line as the arrow, then it will assume that you're trying to return this value. And so
that's why I had a lot of those weird little one-liners, Cecilia, that we were talking about yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's just like what he said about the inception thing, and then trying to simplify it like this. It's like,
yeah, and that's why when I teach it, I keep it like as, I don't try to introduce a whole bunch of new topics, and so I'll usually start this way, but I don't feel good ending this way. I like have to, or this way, I guess. I like have to have return the condition, because you would probably never see someone do this unless they're learning, I guess. So this is like a good state for it to be in if you're not super comfortable with arrow functions and implicit returns and everything like that. Just put in a function declaration like this with the function keyword, and that's fine. The way that I like to think of this callback function is like a function that says, should I include this item or not? And it has to take the item in order to determine that. This also may help if I console log the item. I'm gonna not console log this. What should show up in my console here when I run this?
should it just be Joe, Jan, and Bob?
Close. That's part of it. Remember, under the hood, the filter method is doing a for loop, and it's going to loop over the entire array. And each time this, and it's going to run this function for every item in the array. So when it's doing that, it's going to loop over the whole array. And because it's going to run this function for every item in the array, it's actually going to log all 5 of the names. Joe, Jan, Bob, Becky, super long name here. Does that make sense? Because under the hood, it's just a for loop, like literally just a JavaScript for loop. In fact, one of the exercises we used to do was have students write their own version of filter and attach it to arrays. You can do that with array.prototype.myCoolFilter method and set that equal to a function and like actually build your own version in the and then you have names.myCool. What is going on? Filter method. And you can like actually kind of add stuff to JavaScript that way. You don't need to know this, but like building it from scratch is kind of a cool way to learn it. But yes, under the hood, it's just doing a for loop. It's looping over every single item in the array. And filtered names is the one that is going to be filtered down. So the callback function inside of my filter console logs every one of the names, and then the filter method returns my short names array, and then that gets console logged here in 41. Okay, questions about filter? Any other questions about filter? Okay. Super useful, not super useful with this bunch of strings because that's not really the real world. So let me make an array of users. And usually it's going to be something like an object. And I'm going to simplify this quite a bit, but let's say we have a bunch of user objects, and some of them are logged in and some of them are not. Okay. So users is an array of objects, and some of them are logged in, some of them are not. Who wants to take over and see if you can use the filter method to create a new array of logged in users?
I can't.
You want to try? Oh, you can't. So that leaves Cecilia or Alex.
Yeah,
Cecilia. Oh yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Unless Cecilia wants to do it.
You're good. There's something going on. Like I can't see Zoom anymore. I was trying to unmute myself. I don't know what's going on, but you're good, Alex. You can do.
Okay, so Alex, walk us through each of the steps as you're writing it out.
Yeah, hold on. I'm trying to unmute myself.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I just have to hold the space button to unmute, but how do you do it?
There
Okay, I got it.
should be like an unmute.
Yeah, I got it. All right.
Okay.
So down here, you have to create. So what are we doing again? Is logged in.
Yeah, you're gonna create a new array of only the users that are logged in.
All right. So you got to create a new variable called users logged in. Then that's equals to the filtered users. We're gonna filter the users based on if the user is logged in. Yeah, users that. So we're gonna get the property, the key, right? This is the key.
Mm-hmm.
User's key, and if that's okay, so well, first we're gonna do this filter. Oh, okay. Then we're gonna go by every user. I'm gonna use an arrow function, or should I use a function? Right.
Either way is fine.
Okay, I just use this. And then to select if the user is logged in, we gotta get the key, because we can't just do it on the user. So we have to do user that is logged in, and if that's equals to true, then that's going to be stored in the user is logged in variable.
Awesome. Yeah, let's console log that and we'll take a look.
Okay. Oops. Double check. I can just get rid of this too. Then let's see. How do you run the console log on here?
I have to do it.
Oh, okay.
So look at that. What gets console logged is an array with 2 objects, and it's only the objects where the user's logged in is true. So one thing that Alex just did is he had a triple equals true here. That should work just fine. But it's a little unnecessary because is logged in is already a Boolean. I could just say return whatever Boolean that is. If it's true, then I want my function to return true. And if it's false, I want it to return false. If I were looking just to, let's say Emily, if I were looking just to get the users that are not logged in, how would I change my, so like users not logged in, how would I change my filter callback function?
Well, my first instinct was that you need that exclamation point somewhere, but could you also just triple equals false?
Yeah, either one of those would be fine. So I could say user is logged in equals false, and there's my 3 false logged in users. Or you could say not user dot is logged in. So because this is a Boolean, it just means show me the ones that are false. Or rather, I want my filter function to include everybody whose logged in value is false, but because my filter function will only add items to the new array if it returns true, I'm like flipping it, saying I want the opposite of what the is logged in is. This
And
is
is that the only place the exclamation, I probably would have just tried it out a couple places till it realized where it needed to be, but you wouldn't put it in front of is logged in ever. Like that wouldn't, why would I think to put it there?
no,
Like,
no, yeah, you can't.
Logged in.
Yeah, it's syntactically incorrect to put it there. It would always go at the beginning here.
Cool.
So I think this is more semantic, or like this is easier to understand. to say like, I want everybody whose logged in value is false. That seems a little more intuitive than this. But either one works just fine.
Bob, do you know how the Elvis operator works?
The Elvis operator?
Yeah.
I haven't heard of the Elvis operator.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could explain it.
Oh, it's a binary operator. I don't know. I don't know binary logic very well at all. I did one thing with binary logic on some tutorial at some point and then just promptly forgot it all because I never ever used binary logic.
Oh, okay. So I came in kind of late. Are you going over all these array methods?
We started to. I actually have to run in just like 5 minutes. We were going to talk about multiple array methods, like how to chain them together. I guess we could probably touch on that now. So let's use this users method. And actually, let's look back at this. Cecilia, what did we talk about? Like when you run the filter method, what did we talk about? Like happens or doesn't happen to the names array, and like what? Well, yeah. What does not happen to the names array? Yeah, like when you run filter on names, what happens or what does not happen to the filter to the names array?
Nothing happens because it's just filtering through them, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't modify it, right? It doesn't change. It doesn't change it, but instead it returns the new array that you want. Because it returns a new array, this whole thing, users.filter, like if I take this away, users.filter with this whole callback function inside returns an array. Well, arrays have methods like filter. And so I could theoretically chain a bunch of these filters together because this first filter, and this is not complete, I would have to put a callback function in each one of these, but this first filter returns an array, and then I could further filter that array with another filter and could further filter that array. That's not super common. Usually you would just put the logic in your first filter to get exactly the array you need. But what is more common is to maybe chain another method onto it, like filter followed by a map. Let's say I have this array of data and I filter it out to only show me the users that are not logged in. So that's my triple equals false. And then I want to look at every user from the filtered array. And maybe, gosh, I don't know. Maybe for some reason I only want an array of the string usernames. So essentially, I receive an array of all the users of my system, all 5 of them, and I want an array of just their string usernames of the ones who are not logged in. So then I could say, take my filtered array, which now should have just the last 3 that is logged in a false, and I want you to give me just their usernames. Now map works a little different than filter, where filter you either had to return true or false from your callback function. From map, you return what you want the new array to contain in place of every item in your original array. Maybe instead of starting with a chain, we'll just forget the filter for now and we'll come back to that. And I'll say like const usernames equals users. Just having equals users dot map, and this is also going to take a function. This function, just like most or many of the callback functions, will receive the individual item. So far, this is no different than filter. But the way that map works is instead of returning true or false to determine if you want it included, you return what you want in its place. So if I had say const nums is that, and for some reason I wanted to make an array that told me whether the string or whether the number in the original array was even or odd. So the result would look kind of like this. I'm just trying to space this out so it's like a little more obvious what map is doing. Oh no. My linter is, oh my.
Yeah.
Close enough.
Should just take a screenshot. So yeah, what map does is it maps the array item into the same index of a new array, but modified in whatever way you determine. So this is our starting array, nums, and this is like our goal array, what we're trying to get with .map. Notice that they will always be the same array lengths. Filter may or may not be the same array lengths. If it doesn't filter anything out, then it will be the same array length. If it does filter anything out, the resulting array will always be shorter, right? Smaller. With map, the two arrays will always be the same length because all you're doing is taking one array and basically translating the values of that array into some kind of modification in a new array. So in this case, our original array is 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to translate it or map it into a new array that tells whether those numbers are even or odd. I hard-coded this, or I like wrote it out, but that's kind of what we're going to try and do programmatically. Okay, so
Yeah.
instead of
odd.
There we go. It's muscle memory. So just like filter, map takes a callback function. It's going to look at every item in my array, 1, 2, 3, 4. But what it returns is not true or false. Instead, it's the like what you want to show up at that same index in the new array. So I can say if item, and this is, do you guys know like the using modulo to determine if something is even or odd? Do you guys like, I think that's in either module 0 or module 1.
I do.
Okay, so if divided by 2, the remainder is 0, that means that it's an even number. And so I'm going to return the string even. Otherwise, I'm going to return the string odd. And that's pretty much it. Now, obviously, like with just an array of 4 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's really easy to create this manually. But if this were an array with 10,000 numbers that weren't sequential, that'd be more difficult. And so .map in this case is really useful. Again, there's ways that I can simplify this. Once you feel comfortable with these things, you can make this into an arrow function. And you could actually just use a ternary operator. And so you could say item modulo 2 equals 0. If so, then return the string even, but otherwise return the string odd. And then all of this can go away. And you've got it down to 1 line. The goal is, in programming is not to get things down to 1 line, that if it's confusing to do so, then don't do it. It's much better to be explicit and plain than to like show off your ability to get things down to a single line of code.
Hey, Bob, can you run methods on objects?
Objects,
or you can only run them on the value?
Objects are different because, I mean, yes, you can run methods on objects, but you have to give that object a method. So like I can have person as an object, but then they have a talk method.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can, I can call person.talk.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, maybe there are built-in methods to objects the same way there are built-in methods to arrays and strings and numbers. Could be.
Yeah, because when I do edit challenges, like the hardest ones is actually with objects, like nested objects. Those are like the most confusing because I don't know if you could run methods on objects. I know that they have like keys and value pairs, so maybe I can run it on a value because mostly a string or a number or something.
Yeah. So I do have to run because I've got an interview. But hopefully this was helpful. I think sometimes it helps to take a deep dive onto like a couple of the methods. We didn't like get to fully cover map, but you're going to use map very, very often when you start doing React. Because in React, what you're doing is essentially you take an array of raw data like this and you turn it into elements on the screen, like list items or paragraphs or something that you want to display on the screen. And that way, like right now, you're probably imperatively taking data like this and saying like document.create element list item.text content equals like users at the index of i.username, and then saying append that list item to an unordered list, and then append the unordered list to some div placeholder or something. With React, you don't do any of that. You just say map, and you say turn the data into like an element, and then it will just put it on the screen. So that's really nice. But they do make a lot of use of array methods, specifically map, but also the other ones.